I first saw the Thunderbirds as a kid, and then I ran into Jerry Bolt, and he gave me some hope that they potentially could do that. And then I had a chance to do that. They were kind of showing America's might. You were showing America's technology. You were showing America's skill. You were showing America's patriotism. I grew up in an Air Force family. My father was a career Air Force officer and a pilot and flew in World War II. It turned out my father-in-law was also a career Air Force pilot and flew in World War II, but in the Pacific, my father was in the European theater. And of course, I lived on Air Force bases and saw airplanes since I was a little boy. At some point in life, I actually saw the Thunderbirds do an air show out in California, and that sort of got my interest. I was in the 6th or 7th grade. My last 2 or 3 years of high school, I started to figure out that maybe I was really interested in aviation and decided I wanted to pursue that. Of course, the obvious thing was to try and apply to the service academies, but I also applied for ROTC scholarships, both Air Force and Navy. Of course, the Navy had airplanes too, and was fortunate enough to get accepted at the Air Force Academy and the Naval Academy too, but I, of course, turned them down. I got my wings in July of '69, and in fact, before we ever got a chance to select our airplanes, and you did that by order of merit, and I think I was number 2 in the class. The only 2 airplanes, only 2 fighters in there were A-37s, and so I raised my hand and said, I'll take one of those. And I went over to Louisiana, went through combat crew training, and we actually formed a brand new squadron and deployed from Louisiana as a squadron in late 1969 to Benoit in South Vietnam in the 3rd Attack Fighter Wing. I flew 243 missions in Vietnam. Most of our missions were close air support or in some type of interdiction role. We always assumed that we were getting shot at. We often would come back with, damage to the airplane from ground fire. After every mission, when you left the target area, each airplane would check the other airplane over for what we call battle damage. Because if you did have something that maybe was severe, then we had to worry about landing in an emergency situation in that. But the missions themselves were pretty intense. I came back in late 1970, and I actually came back to another A-37 unit down in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, part of what they call the 1st Special Operations Wing. I was fortunate because most of the guys that were rotating out were not coming back to the fighter world. And I would have preferred to come back to a different airplane, something that was more contemporary. There weren't a lot of A-37s at the time, but I felt very lucky to come back and fly that airplane. It's an interesting story about how I got to the Thunderbirds in many respects. And I was going back to school, and I think the summer of '67 for my last year, and I was on a military airplane and caught a hot back, and this young fellow named Jerry Bolt was on the airplane with me, and he was on his way out to California to go to Vietnam. And it was one of those things, we ended up sort of standing up in the aisle of this airplane, kind of a DC-4 equivalent at the time, DC-7 I remember, and just talking. And it was one of those friendships that just instantaneously developed. And then I kind of lost track of it. And then I knew, well, he came back from Vietnam and had gone to Nellis Air Force Base, which was the home of Thunderbirds. When I was in Fort Walton Beach, I actually ended up going up to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia on a static display. I took an airplane up there. That was a big air show there. And I bumped into him in the bar, and he was standing there in a Thunderbird show suit. And I was kind of, whoa, what are you doing here? He says, well, I'm the narrator for the Thunderbirds. And I was pretty impressed with that. And I had an opportunity through Jerry Bolt to meet the guys on the team. We all had dinner together one night, amazingly. And I was kind of in awe. As we finished dinner that night, they were moving to go somewhere. I was getting ready to jump in my airplane the next day and go back to Fort Walton Beach. He said to me, he says, Steve, I'd really like to see you apply for the Thunderbirds. I think you'd be a good addition to the team. And I was, what? Because I hadn't even considered it. I mean, I had barely, a couple of years in service. So I applied in I guess it was earlier in '72 and that. So I applied, and I got my application sent back with a nice note from the leader, Colonel Tom Swam, who said, you don't meet the requirements, you don't have 1,000 hours of fighter time, but we'd sort of like to see you apply when you do. Okay, I'll do that. So in 1973, I'd met all those requirements, and I applied for the team. Sadly, Jerry Bolt was killed 4 days before Christmas in 1972 in an airplane accident. And that woke us up. My wife was pregnant at the time, and I came back and told her. And of course, in those days, you didn't know if it was a boy or girl, and she said, well, I guess if it's a boy, we have a name. And so we named my son after Jerry Bolt. So I applied in 1973, and up to this point, all I had done was interact with the team. I'd gone to all the public affairs things with them. You were observed to see how you interacted with the civilian population and celebrities and whomever, or just people in general. Well, lo and behold, I got a call that I was finalist, and I was to report out to Nellis, and I think this was early September, to go through more of the process. Well, I'd never flown the F-4. I didn't have a clue, you know. So, but airplanes are airplanes. You push forward, the houses get big, you pull back, the houses get small. You know, what's hard about that? So they said, we realize you've never flown the F-4, but we're going to do a lot of formation, find a position, whether it's in close or out fairly far, and just stay there. You know, we just want to see how you fly airplanes. And we go out to a place called Thunderbird Lake where we did a lot of practicing, and we did loops and rolls and maneuvers for, I don't know, 30 minutes or so. And I climbed out of the airplane, pretty much drenched in sweat because it was pretty intense, and felt like I had done fairly well. So I went back to Louisiana and initially got a call that I hadn't been selected, which kind of didn't surprise me. And then I got another call that said, due to some things that have happened, we have another opening. Would you be interested in still being on the team? And I said, absolutely. And they said, well, there may be an issue here. It looks like potentially we may lose the F-4s and we may go to the T-38. And they said, does that affect your desire to be on the team? And I said, I don't care if you're flying a biplane SPAD. I want to do this. I said, fine. And a couple of weeks after that, I got a call from Colonel Parrish, who's the leader, and said, Steve, you're now in the Thunderbirds, pack your bags and get here. And I did that. Late 1973, the oil crunch had hit, OPEC had done their things. In fact, the team had cut their season short by about a month and shut down and come back to Nellis. And the Blues decided Blue Angels were going to change airplanes. And so the motivation was there for both of the teams to change airplanes. In fact, when I got to Nellis, the commander took me out on the ramp, and there was a big Thunderbird red, white, and blue F-4 out there with a big number 7 on the tail because I was coming on the team as the narrator, and that was my number with my name on the side of it. And he said, take a good look at it because it's probably not going to be here much longer. It's official, we're going to move to the T-38. Northrop Corporation, who made the airplane, the airplanes had to be modified somewhat. We flew the airplanes differently than other people did. When we first got the airplane, we were flying it in pretty much a stock position before Northrop had come out with the specifications to do the modifications. And the feeling was at the time we probably weren't going to fly any air shows in 1974. Well, that didn't sit well with our enlisted force, our maintenance people, who are the greatest people I ever worked with. And so they figured out a way to do Northrop's modifications better and faster. And they spent hours in the hangar modifying airplanes. And you literally had to go in there and order those guys to go home, or they'd have stayed in there 24 hours a day because they wanted to fly air shows. I've never met a more motivated group of people than those maintenance people that we had on that team. And as it turned out, we got the modifications done in time to actually start flying air shows in late July. Narrator is probably a misnomer, because that was the easiest part of the job, was to stand in front of the crowds and narrate what was going on in the air show. The narrator, for all intents and purposes, was the advance man. So as the narrator, I would leave, depending on the site. For a military site, I would leave 2 hours early. For a civilian site, I might leave 3 hours early, depending on the mechanics of everything. And so I would go out, and I had my crew chief in the back seat, and I had a dedicated crew chief, and he was with me for that entire time I was the narrator. Never changed. And we were sort of like a well-oiled team. When we hit the ground, wherever we were, he started working stuff outside, and I started working stuff inside. I really wanted to be part of the diamond. that was kind of where my heart was. And so when the boss said, "You're going to be the right wing," I set up my hand and said, "Yes, sir, I'm happy to be here. Where do we start?" We used to like to go to a site for the initial air show where things were, the weather was good, the air was smooth, nice big open area, long runways, things of that nature. So we tended to go down to Tucson for our first air show every year. So in '75, Chris Patarakis was the new leader, and we'd gone through training season. We all felt that we were ready to go. Chris was flying good, his leader, and we all felt we were flying good as wingmen, and we were ready to go do air shows in front of people. So we went down and we landed on Thursday, and on Friday we actually flew a practice, and that went just really nice. And Saturday, for the first air show, in front of the crowd of, I don't know how many people, 50, 60,000 people there in Tucson, we took off, and the first maneuver we do is the diamond roll. And the roll rate was in the control of leader. I was just hanging on for dear life. And then we turn around, we did the trail roll, same thing. And I was hanging on for dear life because we are just all over the sky. Because the leader is so amped up that he's not flying real smooth. So we came off and we go back after trail, we go back into diamond formation, and we start up to do what we call a vertical turnaround whiffergill, come back in for the diamond loop. And the slot pilot, Doug Roach, says, "Boss, take a breath, slow down. You're killing us back here." And we didn't usually say things like that, but it was so good for Doug to say that because he was the senior guy, Chris was the leader. And Chris says, "I know, I'm going to take a breath." And the rest of the air show went just fine. We have our counterparts in the Navy, the Blue Angels. We refer to them sometimes as Brand X, but we're very proud of those guys. They do marvelous work. We tried to get together once a year with those guys to fly for each other. Usually it was in Pensacola. That seemed to work out best for both teams. We would fly for each other, and we would sit down as a group, and they would ask us, "Well, why do you do this way?" And we'd ask them, "Why do you do that way?" The show philosophies were a little bit different then. I like to think about it. On the Thunderbirds, we were sort of like a ballet. We tended to be a bit more graceful. The Blues tended to be more like a rock concert. It was more impact and sort of wild things they did. Funny thing happened in 1976. We were there, and we had gone there to, again, swap stuff, and we were there, and the Blues said, "Hey, would you guys like to go out in a carrier and watch carrier operations?" And we said, "Yeah, we would like to do that." They said, "Okay, well, we've got to do some administrative work before you can do that, and one of them is you have to watch this training film." "Great, we'll do that." Well, the training film was 30 minutes of carrier accidents, airplanes crashing the carrier. So they said, "Okay, you're done. Let's go get in the airplane, go to the ship." We were all, butta. So anyway, we went out and we trapped on the boat, on the ship, spent the day on the Lexington, and then catapulted off in the afternoon. So I am an honorary tail hooker. And of course, the Blues didn't go with us. They sent us out there by ourselves. And we got back on shore, and they were giggling and chuckling and said, "Well, how was the day? How'd you like the landing?" It was great. So we had a great relationship with those guys. We had gone to a single solo when we went to the F4, and that had carried over to the T-38, and we had been lobbying for years to get the dual solo back. And we finally used the excuse of the bicentennial as the chance to do that, and it was granted to us. So training season for the 1976 year was very difficult. It was difficult in the sense that we were now reintroducing the second solo, and we had to create a new sequence of maneuvers. So when we finally went on the road in early March, we were somewhat fatigued. And then the demands of the '76 season were pretty intense. Everybody wanted you. The drawback to the T-38 was it wasn't air refuelable. So if we were going to go to the East Coast, it took us 3 separate legs to get there. We had to stop twice for fuel. And then, of course, we had to come back. From about the middle of May to Labor Day, I think I was home for maybe 7 or 8 days. There were times, literally, I would wake up in the morning and think, where am I? Oh yeah, I'm in Pittsburgh, or I'm in Chicago, or I'm in Des Moines, wherever I was. 2 years of flying demonstrations is enough. I mean, I flew almost 200 air shows. Probably flew close to 200 arrival shows. Goodness knows how many practices I flew, throw in another 200-300. I'd been out there doing stuff. And one of the reasons it was a 2-year tour is we didn't ever want complacency to set in. And frankly, I got comfortable in certain maneuvers. Comfortable to the point where I had to sort of, okay, pay attention, Steve, don't do something foolish here. There were certain maneuvers you never got comfortable in. They were always difficult. Trail rolls, trail was one of those. But like a diamond roll was sort of, another diamond roll. And so I had to sort of pump myself up to make sure my concentration was 100%. That's not to say I was laissez-faire about it or just sort of casual about it, very cavalier. I was, you're flying that close together, that close to the ground, you best pay attention. The airplanes can be very unforgiving machines, as can the ground. So it was bittersweet when I left the team in '76. America's a pretty neat country. I met people across all walks of life, from very wealthy people to folks that didn't have a whole lot. But 99.9% of them were just very appreciative of what we were doing. They were enamored, thrilled seeing an air show. Every now and then you get someone who wanted to know where we were during the air show. And you say, what do you mean? He said, you're not in the airplane, you must be over in some building doing this by remote control. Oh no, we're in the airplane. Really? But everybody was generally very kind, very outgoing, wanted to know, were interested in what you did. You're a Thunderbird, you have two different personas. When you're standing out there or when you're in a group of people and you're in a uniform, whether it was a show suit or whether you were in a coat and tie. And so you were representing the Thunderbirds, you were representing the Air Force, you were representing the country. But I could walk into a room and spend 2 hours in there and talk to 100 people, engage them, and I could walk out of that room, go up to my hotel room, change into a pair of jeans and a shirt, and walk down to that same room, and I might not get a second glance. So it was humbling in that respect. You were the epitome of something. You were representing something. You were a Thunderbird when you were in your garb, if you will, your paraphernalia. But when you took that garb off, you were just a regular guy. And I think that kept us all grounded for the most part. I'm proud of what I did. Like I said, I'm honored to have the opportunity to have done that. And hopefully I represented my country and the team well in those 3 years that I was on the team.